1:47 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz was black glass and dead silence. No commercial traffic, no fishing boats, nothing moving on the surface that was not pre-authorized. 30 meters above the water, flying so low that the rotor wash was kicking salt spray off the wave tops. The first wave of MH-60M Blackhawks came screaming through the darkness at 287 kilometers per hour. They were blacked out, radar silent, running on terrain-following systems so advanced they do not appear in any public defense budget. 12 of them in tight formation, staggered at intervals calculated to the meter, each one carrying operators who had been awake for 19 hours and were more dangerous for it. This was Delta Force, 5,000 of them, and tonight they owned the sky over Hormuz. The response was not chaos, it was choreography, programmed in blood and steel. 1:52 a.m. The MC-130J Commando 2 had been orbiting at altitude for 40 minutes, invisible to Iranian radar. Its electronic warfare suite was painting a complete real-time picture of every emission source within 60 kilometers. The aircraft was a flying command center. Surveillance feeds, encrypted communications relays, signals intelligence, all of it funneling into the controllers, who sat in the red-lit interior and watched the assault teams approach their target with the detached precision of chess players, moving pieces across a board they could see perfectly. Or so they believed. Below and ahead, the IRGC facility materialized out of the desert dark, exactly at the designated coordinates. It was a hardened command complex, partially buried, reinforced with thick concrete over 3 underground levels. This was the nerve center controlling the encrypted networks that coordinated Iranian anti-ship missile batteries along the entire northern shore of the strait. 18 months of satellite imagery, 18 months of signals intelligence, 18 months of human sources and pattern-of-life analysis, all of it distilled into a target package so comprehensive that the assault teams had been training on a full-scale replica for 6 weeks in the Nevada desert. They knew this building better than its own engineers. 2:09 a.m. The Blackhawks flared hard over the ridgeline and the ropes dropped. Fast rope insertion. Operators sliding down in 3-second intervals, hitting the ground and scanning with weapons up before the dust from their landing had even settled. The MH-6 Little Bird Scout helicopters, the impossibly small and lethal killer eggs, peeled away to establish a perimeter suppression pattern. Their GAU-19 miniguns and rocket pods pointed outward, ready to turn anything that moved on the approach roads into wreckage, 4 of them orbiting at 140 knots. Pilots in night vision, fingers light on triggers capable of putting 6,000 rounds per minute on a target the size of a car. The AH-6 attack variants stayed even lower, using the terrain for cover, waiting. The assault had not started yet. Everything remained in the green wash of night optics and the absolute silence of discipline. 2:09 a.m. 4 assault elements hit their breach points simultaneously. The perimeter fence went down in 3 places at once, sliced by specialized tools that cut through hardened steel mesh like paper. Guard positions had already been neutralized quietly and efficiently, with no sound carrying more than 2 meters. It was textbook. It was perfect. The teams flowed through the gaps with the fluid, unhurried movement of men who had done this hundreds of times. Each operator maintained precise interval spacing, each fire team in constant visual contact with the one ahead. The entire formation moved like a single organism, with 5,000 nerve endings and one central intent. No alarms, no unplanned contact, no deviation from the timeline. 6 minutes ahead of schedule, at 2:11 a.m., the bunker door opened exactly as the intelligence had predicted. The lead element pushed through, weapons up, IR lasers painting the darkness in wavelengths only their optics could detect. The corridor was exactly as mapped. The junction at 15 meters was exactly where it was supposed to be. The secondary door at 30 meters was closed, but unlocked, just as the source reporting indicated. 2 seconds of silence. Then, every light in the facility came on at once. This was not emergency lighting, nor the pale flicker of backup systems. Blinding industrial red flooded every corridor from concealed fixtures. They had been installed specifically for this moment, specifically to rob the assault teams of their night vision advantage. In the single instant when disorientation was most lethal, the operators flipped their nods up completely. For 1.3 seconds, an eternity in a gunfight, 5,000 of the most lethal soldiers on Earth were functionally blind. 2:11 a.m. The machine guns opened up before anyone's vision had recovered. The first 60 seconds of this ambush were the most violent minute in the history of American special operations since Mogadishu. The IRGC had positioned PKM machine guns in hardened alcoves on both sides of the main corridor, protected by ballistic barriers with overlapping fields of fire that left no dead ground. They had pre-positioned ammunition, backup gunners, and communications that were not running through any frequency the American electronic warfare suite had been monitoring. It was a hardwired intercom system, copper wire, in concrete walls. It was immune to jamming, immune to interception, and completely invisible to every sensor on every aircraft circling overhead. The ambush had been engineered by someone who understood Delta Force, how they moved, how they stacked on doors, and how their formations were structured. The kill zones were placed at exactly the points where the assault teams would be most densely packed, most committed, and least able to reverse. It was not improvised. It had been waiting. But Delta Force did not collapse. That is the thing that separates these operators from every other military force on Earth. Not just their training or equipment, but a specific psychological architecture built through 18 months of selection and years of combat. The reaction was immediate and correct. Fragmentation grenades went into the alcoves within 4 seconds of the first burst. Smoke grenades followed, filling the corridor with an obscurant that degraded the machine gunner's visibility, while the operator's nods recovered from the whiteout. Fire teams split and collapsed against the walls, moving in bounding pairs. Each man covered the other's movement with controlled fire. They were hurt, but they were not broken. Overhead, the tactical picture was deteriorating at a staggering rate. On the MC-130J, battle management controllers watched their communications architecture fragment in real time. The IRGC's electronic warfare systems, which had remained cold and silent during the approach to avoid detection, now came to life across the entire spectrum. The encrypted radio net, designed to give every operator a shared real-time picture of the battle space, was taking continuous hits. Data packets were corrupting. Teams that should have been talking to each other were hearing nothing but lifeless white noise. The MH-60M Blackhawk, holding the eastern orbit, was the most capable battlefield helicopter ever built. Its fly-by-wire flight control system could hold a hover in conditions that would crash any other rotary wing aircraft. Its radar warning receiver, RWR, covered every known threat frequency, but none of it was enough. The missile came from a position that was not in any of the target packages. It was a vehicle-mounted MESA-3 system that had driven into position 2 hours before the assault. It sat cold, not emitting, hidden behind a rock outcropping on the southern ridgeline. The launch signature hit the RWR at the same instant the co-pilot saw the flare of ignition on the horizon. The pilot broke right and down, pushing the aircraft into a terrain-masking maneuver that was technically perfect, but geometrically impossible given the distance to the ridge. He had exactly 1.8 seconds to create more separation than 1.8 seconds allowed. The missile struck the rear rotor assembly. The Blackhawk came apart in a controlled catastrophe. Controlled in the sense that the pilot's last inputs kept the nose from pitching fully inverted before impact, allowing it to strike the eastern slope at a survivable angle. The fireball was visible for 15 kilometers. For 3 seconds, the tactical net went completely silent as 5,000 people processed what they had just watched. Then the commander's voice came over the net, flat and hard. All elements, push. Push now. 2:29 a.m. The decision to abandon the original plan and go straight through the middle was made in the time it takes to exhale. There was no realistic alternative. The perimeter outside the facility was closing. IRGC Quick Reaction Forces, QRF, that had been pre-positioned at staging areas within 4 minutes of the target were moving now. Trucks and armored vehicles materialized from the desert dark, headlights off, moving fast. The quiet extraction option was dead. The option of fighting back to the fence breach points and melting into the terrain was dead. The only door still open was forward, through the worst of the fighting, to the primary objective in the facility's 3rd underground level. And it was closing by the second. Delta pushed hard. This was no longer Special Operations doctrine. It was an infantry assault conducted by men carrying 45 kilograms of equipment in an enclosed subterranean environment against defenders who knew every hatch and every corner. The little birds outside were working overtime. Their miniguns produced a low-frequency mechanical growl, tearing up the approach roads as the QRF vehicles tried to close in. The pilots flew so aggressively that 2 of them later reported pulling G-forces that exceeded the aircraft's rated structural limits. The AH-6S went after the vehicle column on the northern approach road with 2 7.5-inch rockets, turning the lead vehicles into burning obstacles that stacked the column behind them and bought the ground teams critical minutes. 2:31 a.m. The specialized breach charge on the command center's final barrier was a doorbuster with explosive power calculated to vibrate the entire lower level of the facility. The blast blew the armored steel door off its hinges in a single frame of white light and concussive pressure. This pressure was not just sound. It was a physical entity that compressed chests and rattled the skeletal frames of every living thing within a 10-meter radius. The assault team pushed through the opening before the last of the debris had finished hitting the floor. The fight inside the room lasted exactly 90 seconds and involved levels of extreme violence that never appear in official after-action reports. It was a collision between 2 entities: the survival instinct of the defenders and the mechanical precision of Delta. The demolition teams had exactly 4 minutes to complete their task. They used only 3.5 minutes. Charges were placed onto the most critical nodes: structural columns, server infrastructure, power distribution nodes, communications equipment, and the hardened data storage systems that the intelligence community had desperately wanted to exploit but had now determined impossible to capture. The building had to come down. Everything in it had to become ash. When the information gap can no longer be occupied, the only solution is to erase its existence entirely. Charges set, 30 seconds on the clock. All elements move. War was no longer arrows on a map. It was a race against firepower and gravity. 2:35 a.m. The withdrawal was a running gunfight from the command center to the surface. 4 flights of stairs, 2 breached doors, and 3 corridor junctions held by IRGC fighters who had finally moved their QRF inside the facility through rear access tunnels and were pushing hard to cut off exit routes. The Americans ran toward the sound of the firing rather than away from it because the exit was on the other side of the contact, and there was no other calculation to make. The remaining Blackhawks came back in under conditions that the aviation community will argue about for years. The anti-aircraft envelope around the facility was active and aggressive. Radar-guided systems, IR-guided systems, and optically tracked systems were all working simultaneously. All were being fed by an integrated fire control network that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The pilots flew through it. They flew through it because the men on the ground needed them to, and because there is no version of this profession that stops short of that requirement. The MH-60S took hits. Multiple aircraft suffered damage to hydraulic lines and rotor systems. One aircraft lost tail rotor authority on short final and landed so hard it bounced, but the crew stayed conscious, and the operators who hit the pickup zone in the next 40 seconds piled into it anyway. Weapons pointed out of every door, firing in every direction as the pilot dragged the damaged aircraft back into the air through sheer mechanical stubbornness. 2:36 a.m., 2:37 a.m., 2:38 a.m. The last man cleared the pickup zone. The last helicopter cleared the ridgeline. The IRGC was exactly 50 meters behind the final element when the ropes went up. 2:38 a.m. and 14 seconds. The explosion came up through the earth first, a pressure wave that traveled through bedrock before it became sound. It was felt in the chest and the teeth before it registered in the ears. Then the ground opened. The facility's roof vented upward in a column of fire and concrete debris that rose 200 meters before the night air caught it and spread it across the ridgeline in a slow, terrible rain of dust and burning material. Secondary explosions followed. Fuel, ordnance, pressurized systems, each one feeding the next in a sequence lasting nearly 40 seconds. This rolling series of detonations turned the eastern approach to the Strait of Hormuz into temporary daylight. The command center was rubble. The communications nodes were rubble. The targeting infrastructure for the missile batteries was gone. 3:21 a.m. The formation crossed back over friendly airspace. 12 helicopters went in. 11 came back. The missing Blackhawks crew had been confirmed alive by the crash site recovery element, a separate mission already spinning up, a separate set of men already moving toward a burning hillside in the dark. Nobody talked on the flight back. There was nothing to say that the night had not already said more clearly. 4:47 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz went back to breathing slowly in the pre-dawn dark. Commercial traffic would resume at first light. Tankers would move through the choke point with no knowledge of what had happened 6 hours before on the North Shore. No knowledge of what it cost to keep those sea lanes open for another day, another week, another iteration of the permanent, grinding, invisible war. The math was simple and brutal. The objective was destroyed. The mission succeeded. One helicopter down. Operators who would not be coming home. The question haunting every debrief was never whether it was a victory. It was whether 5,000 of the best soldiers had proven something extraordinary about human capability, or whether they had simply been lucky enough to survive a trap that was better designed than their plan. The Strait does not answer that question. It just waits for the next night.